Good morning. I am Bill Blackwell, President of the Cuero Community Foundation. I'd like to welcome you here this morning to our Lunch and Learn. Our board, Deborah Barris is right here, and Paul Solaro and Paul Holcomb and David Kleinecke in the back, and Joe Adams is not with us. Our speakers today, Dave Sather, Sather Financial Group, and Gohmert, CPA, Cuero, and Brit King, President and CEO of New Braunfels Community Foundation. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Dave?
Real quick, how many of y'all were here at our first Lunch and Learn? So a fair number of you, which is great. There'll be a quiz, see what all you guys remembered. And for those of you, this is your first time, welcome. For me, this is very much, it's something I do professionally, but it's also something that's pretty personal to me also. Professionally, I run what's called a registered investment advisory firm. So we're a fee-only firm. We have offices in Victoria and New Braunfels. We manage about $1.3 billion. And if you've never heard of us, that's great because we don't do any advertising and I really hate salespeople. So I know everybody who's got a little bit of oil money has always had that phone call from somebody in New York who has something they've got to sell you. You will never get that phone call from us. Professionally, I first started learning about community foundations several years ago when I was trying to develop some sort of fund to support Texas Lutheran University's business department. And so Texas Lutheran, my alma mater, Chris's alma mater, Cody's alma mater, Eileen's alma mater, and probably several other people in the room. Very near and dear to my heart, but in case you didn't notice, we don't have a multi-billion-dollar semi-pro football team like some folks in Austin or College Station. So you try and think about every way you could possibly support them and provide things that would make life a little bit better. And so for several years, I kept trying to think about how could we develop something that would provide creature comforts, whether it was extra software or maybe a stipend for a professor to take a semester off. And every time it kept coming back to a community foundation, which I wasn't very familiar with before. But it allowed a bunch of people that had a common goal to pool our money, to get an immediate tax deduction, to allow the money to grow. And then whenever the business department in Texas Lutheran needed something, we're available to serve as a sounding board to say, yep, that sounds great. Let us get you the money. And so that was when I first met Brit. We were looking for a community foundation in the neighborhood. And Brit was very accommodating in providing the New Braunfels Area Community Foundation as a home for all these people that shared this common vision to pool our assets, to have professional investment management, for everybody to get an upfront tax deduction, but then also to allow the money to grow. And so for me professionally, that's a big case of heartburn for me because if you have a private foundation, you normally have a 5% annual payout. Well, when inflation's running 8 or 9% and the stock market's down 15 or 20%, the last thing I want is the federal government to tell me, oh, by the way, now you have to pay out 5%. I would rather have some level of discretion to say, let's scale back this year, or what makes sense relative to inflation, relative to what the stock market has done. Instead, if you go down the road of a private foundation, you are stuck. You have all the operating costs. You have then the government telling you, here's the tax return. It's going to be expensive to keep track of all this. And then you have to pay out 5% a year. Now, not to defend the government, but they set up a bunch of these rules when fixed income assets like CDs and treasury bonds, corporate bonds, all paid 5, 6, 7, 8%. They never dreamed of a world where the 10-year treasury, we'd be thrilled that it actually broke 3% recently. So when you understand the math of how you manage assets in perpetuity, you recognize that the deck is very much stacked against any endowment that is forced to pay out 5% a year. The community foundation, you can pay out 5, 10%, you can pay out the whole thing immediately, or you can throttle back and say, you know what, this is our family's legacy. This is something that's very meaningful. We want this to go on in perpetuity. We want this to be a meaningful legacy in the same manner that it was to our family, to kids today, whomever it might be. And so that allows you to manage the money from a much more strategic perspective, such that you are constantly paying out a little bit, but keeping your purchasing power growing over time. To me, that is just absolutely one of the beautiful things about a community foundation. And that was when we first got going with Brit, and that fund now is over $250,000. And it just thrills me to send a report to the business department at TLU and say, look, no matter how tight the budget is at TLU, we've got your back. We've got a little extra. So whatever that pressing need is, we can help you achieve that goal. This became very much of a personal endeavor for myself and my wife. So our firm is now 23 years old, and unfortunately, I'm not getting any younger. I'm 55 years old, and as my doctor likes to remind me every time I go to see him, my cholesterol's high, I'm overweight, and I'm one step closer to death every day. Thank you so much, Doc. That is an endeavor I have not figured out how to avoid. Every one of us is going to be pushing up daisies at some point. I have worked my tail off to build our firm. My wife is a PhD educator. She is a very, very smart person. We don't have any children, so developing a legacy that is meaningful really takes a lot of time and a lot of thought. And so in going back down this road, that is what we are doing with our estate. We are set up a fund with the Cuero Community Foundation. Why Cuero when I live in Victoria? I told Bill earlier, it's pretty easy. I look in this room and there is a room full of decision makers here. You come over to Victoria, there's 60,000 people just running like crazy ants on the sidewalk. You don't have the leaders in Victoria the way that you did when the O'Connors and the Welders were around. But Cuero is a community that is run by very civically minded leaders who know what is important and know how to get things done. And that was very attractive for me because I think that means that one day when I'm pushing up daisies, the intent of what I set up is going to be followed through on. I also think the cost is right, and at the end of the day, who doesn't like Bill Blackwell? He is a really good guy. He's been great to work with, as have all the other board members. And so when my wife and I are done, all of our estate goes into the Cuero Community Foundation, but we decided not to wait until we die. So last year, two of my business partners who've been with me 20 years, they approached me about buying part of our firm. So they went to investment bankers and they borrowed a bunch of money, and I sat there and I thought, okay, I can either take that money and I can go buy another car I don't need. My wife can add to her shoe collection, or we can try and think about something that's a little bit more meaningful to the community at large. And so we ended up donating about $2 million worth of my firm's stock to the Cuero Community Foundation. We then had those assets valued, make sure everything was third-party, arm's length, and then my two associates ended up buying those shares back out from the Cuero Community Foundation. So that allowed me to facilitate a transition plan down to my employees, got buy-in from them such that if I'm in a car accident on the way home today, I know my firm continues to run. But more importantly, it gave us $2 million to work with in the Cuero Community Foundation so we could start managing it today and start giving away assets in a meaningful manner. And that's exactly what we've done. So all of this has happened pretty much since the last time we met. And I've used this to develop a new program at Texas Lutheran called the Big Dog Endowment. And so when I look around this room, there's a lot younger people here today, so kudos to the young folks. But, obviously philanthropy is quite often for the gray-haired folks. That to me creates a problem that we don't have a generation of younger people that are thinking philanthropically about what is sustainability? How do you manage assets in perpetuity? What is a good grant? And so that's the program that we have developed, is to try and teach kids good philanthropy so that they are really scrutinizing where the assets are going to go and is it making a meaningful impact. So the students have to break down 990s. They have 990 as a tax return for a nonprofit. So if we're going to give away money, we want to know exactly how the numbers break down. And so with the war in Ukraine this semester, students had to go and identify the single best way they could benefit the people of Ukraine, and broke them into teams. They had to go research their best ideas. They had to present them to a professional board that is skilled in understanding these issues. And when it was done, we wrote a check for tens of thousands of dollars. Go help the folks in Ukraine. Again, helping the students along the way to understand this money has to last in perpetuity. Even though you'd like to give all the money for this year to the folks in Ukraine, you've got to think about the concept of opportunity cost. You have to think about how you distribute money and make sure that it is very intentionally and wisely used. And then the students all have follow-up. How did we use the money? We sent money to Doctors Without Borders. What did they do with it? Was it well spent? Would you do it again? To me, that is helping to pass it on down to the next generation. Lets my wife and I give kids some money to play with training wheels, make sure they don't completely drive the bus off into the ditch. And to me, I hope that it propels this going forward. And I hope it's a lesson for everybody on how great philanthropy can be done. So thank you for letting me be here today.
Well, it's always hard to follow Dave. So when we're on the Board of Regents at Texas Lutheran, I always make sure I go first so I don't have to follow him. But today I didn't get that choice. Many of the things that he has to say were also on my list. And as y'all might find out, we didn't practice this, so we'll just give it a shot. Everybody being busy, we just came off of two days of board meetings last week at Texas Lutheran. But I just wanted to cover some of the same things, and to make one more point about the immediate benefit that you get on the donation so that you can take a tax break while you're still alive. But there's also another benefit, and that is that by giving now, you're removing that from your estate. So you're also saving estate tax in the end by having made that gift at this point. Some of the other things that are of interest, might be of interest, is families can, as Dave and his wife have done, that's a real attractive idea, is you as a family can decide on an endowment or a donor advised fund, and you can make your choice on the charities that you give to. So, that gives you a chance to really help local organizations and to pick the things that you're really passionate about. And that's a big plus. As you know, this year, 60% of your adjusted gross income can be given away, and you can take a tax break for that. So right now, for many years, we were at 50% of adjusted gross income. Last year, you could make a gift that was 100% of adjusted gross income if you so chose, and right now it's 60%. Stocks, bonds, and things like that have a 30% limitation. Another area that may be of interest to some of you, and I know that a few people in this room actually do this, and is a very popular tax savings idea, is if you are of the age where you have to take minimum distributions from IRAs, you can take that distribution and have it sent directly to the Cuero Community Foundation, and you are not paying any tax on that distribution because you have sent it direct to the foundation. That makes your gift really leveraged up. If you're in the 37-40% tax bracket, you just gave an extra 40 cents on every dollar that you give to the community foundation. So you might want to consider using your IRA distributions as a way to fund a project at the community foundation that will help future generations. Also, I think a last final point is you get to remain engaged with the community. You get to participate, you get to help direct where funds are going. And I think that's a big plus. While you're still alive, you get to see some of the benefits of what your money has accomplished, which I think is a very rewarding and satisfying experience. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
All right, well, that's a tough act to follow, both of them. We did get this deal up here, so I need Vanna White to come help me with the slides. We were a little worried that wasn't going to come up and I was going to ramble, so I'm glad we were able to get that up. But anyway, thank you so much for having me. We're going to talk a little bit about what a community foundation is. Kind of the goal is, my goal is, and I know the board's goal is to just increase the awareness and understanding about what a community foundation does. So that's going to be my goal, okay? So we're going to talk about, you go on to the next one. Okay, so what is a community foundation? So it's a place that, allows people with a philanthropic desire to accomplish their goals, okay? We mainly work with donors to set up funds to support whatever it is they want to support. It could be their church, it could be their favorite nonprofit, it could be a ton of different things. So it's a lot to talk about, okay? There's over 700 of these in the United States. Every large city in the country has one. Go ahead. And really in the last probably 20 to 25 years that they've really exploded. You're starting to see smaller communities start their own community foundation. As an example, I think Corpus Christi probably covers this area. But so why have one here? Because people want to keep their money local. They don't, we've got one little town where I'm from, and San Antonio actually covers our area. People from New Braunfels think San Antonio is New York City. They're not sending their money to San Antonio. And so keeping it local is important, okay? So we are 501c3, so anything that you're given is you're able to take a write-off on. We administer funds set up by donors, and then we try to serve 4 areas. Mainly when we want to serve our donors, we work with advisors. Advisors in my mind are a CPA, estate planning attorney, or a financial advisor. If an individual or a family wants to do something like this, they're going to go to one of those people, or if not all 3 of those people. So the community foundation has tools that help those advisors help their clients. Okay, and then we also work with nonprofits. Most nonprofits are not set up to manage financial assets. They're set up to affect change in whatever it is that they do. And so when somebody leaves money to a nonprofit, oftentimes it's better to have a third party, to kind of run that money. So that helps a lot. If we do all those 3, then the community is going to benefit, right? So that's what we try to do. Okay? So these are some of the ones just around the state. Just you see the size of some of these. San Antonio's, I think actually it's higher than that now. I think it's just over $1 billion. I like to look at San Angelo. They started about 20 years ago with no money. They've got $180 million in assets, and in their pipeline, which is sort of a salesy term, Dave, sorry, there's probably $400 million that's coming to that foundation in the form of wills and bequests. So they've done a phenomenal job. So as you can see, there's some of the smaller towns are starting to start their own community foundations. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about endowments and what that really, really means. Endowment just means permanent. And so how do you run an endowment fund that gives away money all the time and not run it to zero? Well, it has to be invested. and I think Dave can talk about that more than I can, but it's important to understand how that works. And so the next slide is go ahead. Is an example I like to use. This is a lady that was in Fort Worth. She died in 1985 and left almost $13 million. And this is a little bit outdated. It goes up to about 2012, I believe, yes. But up until that point, she gave away $22 million out of that fund. And the fund after that was worth about $27 million. That's endowment math, right? I mean, talk about an impact and a legacy. Those numbers are probably a lot higher now. So if you adopt that endowment math and that model, it really can be powerful. I just wanted to show that example. Okay, let's talk about some of the types of funds that you can have at a foundation like this. We're going to talk about donor advised funds a little bit later, but a field of interest fund is a fund that somebody might be really passionate about education, animals, women's rights, fill in the blank, but they don't have a favorite nonprofit. You can set up a field of interest fund, the board of the foundation, or a group that is appointed by the board can make grants into the field annually. And that's really important because you could put away money now that's going to support something that doesn't even exist yet. So it's it's a great long-term tool for a foundation like this. A designated fund is set up to benefit one organization. So it's like their own endowment fund. That's really important because if you've served on any boards, they really are run horribly. They rely every single year on fundraisers to keep the lights on. And so if you have an endowment fund, it can lessen that burden of having to fundraise every year to keep the doors open. And so that's what that is. And then an unrestricted fund is my favorite type of fund because it gives the community foundation the most leeway and the power to affect change. And so when something happens in a community, it's nice to have that fund like that. So there's money to help help with any issues that arise. Okay, so let's talk about why are people want to be charitable? Why are they philanthropic? And the best part of my job for the last 8 years, I've learned that nobody's the same. Everybody has a lot of their own reason for wanting to give back. So I just thought I'd go over a few of those. So the first one is they don't have any heirs. Look at Dave Sather, a great example. He's done a phenomenal job of building his business, and he's going to do something with that when he and his wife are gone. So that's a big one. Okay. Here's another huge one. They're scared if they give their kids way too much money, it'll ruin them. And I've seen it many, many times. If a young person gets a ton of money, they lose their ambition, they lose their drive. That's a general statement, not true for everybody, but we've all seen it happen. So that's one. Go ahead. Legacy. How do I want to be remembered? And if I can set up a fund that's going to give back into the community forever in my name, that's a legacy that's attractive to me. So that's another one. Okay, here's a great one. So you might have your favorite nonprofit. You support them with their fundraiser every year. You go to their gala. You play in their golf tournament. You participate in their capital campaigns every time one comes around. Well, when you die, that support stops. And so you can set up a fund that keeps that support going. So that's one I see a lot of. This probably the biggest one is a lot of times it's going to boil down. It will boil down to, do I want to give it to the government or do I want to give it to my community? So that's a big one there. This is more kind of a faith-based thing. I see people just have a strong desire to do something good, so that's probably one that's in it. That one's in probably all the other ones as well. And then the last one, it just makes people feel good. I know I'm not a rich person, but my wife and I give away some money. I like the way it makes me feel. So that's a big one too. Okay, so why work with your local community foundation? Before you do that, you got to answer these 3 questions. Are you passionate about giving back to Cuero? Do you want to support the nonprofit community in an efficient way? And do you want to create a legacy that you could pass on to your heirs? And if you answer yes to any of those 3, if not all 3, then here's why you should work with the Community Foundation. You keep everything local. You know that the people here are going to run your money in the way that you want your wishes to be carried out. The Community Foundation board, if they're not already, they're going to very quickly be the experts on the nonprofit community here. You keep your money here where your heart is. It's invested responsibly. And I believe that when we all work together for a common goal, we're better and we're more efficient. Those are the reasons you should work with your Community Foundation. Okay, donor advised fund. I really want to hit on this a little bit more because it's complicated. So a donor advised fund, basically you give money to the Community Foundation, you write it off in the year that you gave it, but you retain the ability to tell the Community Foundation who to give the money to and when to give the money to them. So it's like your charitable checking account, if you will. And so it's beneficial to a community to have a community foundation with a lot of donor advised funds, because what will start happening, it's happening to me up there, is, in fact, about 3 weeks ago in the Braunfels, the crisis center, which handles abused women, burned to the ground. And we have 18 women now that need a place to stay. Within 2 hours, I had about $50,000 to find hotel rooms for them, because I went to all my donor advisors who I knew well. I didn't go to all of them. I knew the ones that would touch their heartstrings, and I was able to get money extremely quickly to help a horrible situation. That's what's going to happen when you get a bunch of donor advised funds. It's a centralized place that with people who care, that want to help. So that's and so one thing's, sometimes with philanthropy, people think it's for old, rich people. And a donor advised fund can be set up with as little as $10,000. You can start giving to it over time, and young people can get into philanthropy in a very easy, efficient way. So it's not just for old, rich people. I hate that. And then a couple of things about a donor advised fund. You can give from your donor advised fund with your name attached to it or anonymously. And that's important, because when you start giving away money, the phone starts ringing a lot more, people wanting more money. So if you want to be anonymous, you can. I have a lot of donors that really appreciate that. And then you can also pass on the advisory role to your children or to anybody that you want to. So my wife and I have a donor advised fund. It's not a huge one. When we pass away, some money's going to go into that fund, and then our sons are going to be responsible for how to give that money away. I like to control my kids from the grave. It excites me. A better way to say that is I'm going to give them a vehicle that's going to encourage them to be charitable and to give back. So that's a little bit about donor advised funds. Okay. So it's hard to read this slide, but the left is a donor advised fund at a community foundation. The middle one is if you could do one at a Fidelity or any of the other huge nonprofit houses around. And then the far right is a private foundation. And I'm having a hard time reading that, but let's see. I'll just tell you, I'll just wing it from there because I can't read that. But a donor advised fund doesn't cost a nickel to set up. So you can set up without any fees. It can be done in a matter of hours. If you set up a private foundation, I'm not an attorney, but I know there's some fees to set that up. There's an excise tax that's applied if you have a private foundation that's not applied to a donor advised fund. So that's important to know. The 5% payout that Dave mentioned, if you have one of those, if it's a private foundation, you must give away 5% every year. Donor advised fund does not have that requirement. Yeah, I can't read that, I'm sorry. Also, if you want to give some kind of a complex gift, something other than cash or securities, a donor advised fund at the community foundation can handle that. A private foundation can handle that too, I'm sure, but just like Dave said, he had some stock in his company, non-marketable securities, and so he was able to do that with the community foundation. He would not have been able to do that if it was at Fidelity or one of those kind of places. So that's important to note too. So, and then I believe you're going to get a lot better customer service with a donor advised fund at a community foundation than you will if it's at Fidelity. I've got all kinds of examples I could prove that point, but just know that you're going to pick up the phone, somebody's going to answer the phone, and you're going to get done what you want done. That's important too. And then if you have a private foundation, you also have to file a tax return. You have to have minutes. You have to have all those policies in place, and all that's done within the foundation if you have a fund here. So just a few things there. Okay. All right. So how can you help? I was always told that I think everything is sales, Dave. I think everything is sales, and so you're always supposed to ask for something when you have the opportunity. So how can you help? So the best way you can help is just be an advocate. And what does that mean and what doesn't it mean? It doesn't mean you stop every person in church and say you need to give to the community foundation. It doesn't mean that. It means when you hear or know of a situation where the community foundation could add value, mention it. That's it. I despise asking people for money. If I had to be a fundraiser, I would be the worst person in the world. I don't ask people for money. I listen to donors that have a philanthropic interest, and I come up with a solution for them. And so when you run across that, refer them over to Bill or Deborah or whoever. And that's the best way you can help, okay? So again, we're not trying to sell every single person. We're trying to find somebody that wants to be philanthropic, that has the means to be philanthropic. So we're looking for, I always like to say this, we're looking for people who are looking for us. We solve issues, and I'm not good enough salesman to convince somebody to be philanthropic. I'm just not good enough. So we're looking for those people that are in that spot in their lives, and the community foundation can help them, I know, okay? I like to show this at the end of all my slides. Anybody know what that's from? I know some of y'all saw it last year probably. That's from the Tour de France in 1929, and if you notice, they're all smoking cigarettes. And I like to show this especially at home because we have a lot of real stubborn Germans that don't like new things. And so they thought that smoking enhanced their physical, opened up their blood vessels, the blood flow, and it would help them with their performance. Somebody thought, yeah, maybe there's a better way than that. So I'd like you to just open your mind to, hey, this is a new thing in Cuero. Maybe you don't really quite understand it, but this might be the better way to do things. So I like to show that just as a little joke. Okay. All right. That's all I have. So I was hoping we'd get a lot of questions so we can answer some questions. Somebody has to. Don't be shy.
You did good. That's no question.
I'm not that good. Okay. Yes, sir.
Can you take money back out of it?
No.
Pay taxes?
No. Once the money goes, they're going to give you a letter that says, thank you for your gift. Here's your letter to use on your taxes. So you've taken that deduction. It's gone. But that donor advised fund allows you to give away money. You just can't go back to you or any heirs or anything.
Any nonprofit?
Right. It could be a church. It could be a school. It has to be a qualified organization. Well, that generally means 501c3 church or school.
No grants out.
Yes, ma'am.
What about real property?
Yes, absolutely. When you have anything that is not marketable, like cash or stock, there's some hoops you have to jump through, such as you have to make the gift before you agree to sell it. You have to get it appraised by a qualified appraiser if it's more than $5,000. So there's a few things. Dave can probably tell you all about them because he's probably just did that, but you absolutely can.
So, Brit, we have a couple of education foundations, hospital foundation here in Sather. So convince me that it's better to give to the community foundation than to directly to each one of those foundations.
I can't convince you of that. If your passion is to give to that foundation, that's exactly what you should do. This is not in competition. We're not going to try to tell somebody you shouldn't do that. You should give it here. What's your passion? And if your passion is education and scholarships for local kids, that's exactly where you should give it. But if you have passions outside of that, then the community foundation is a good option. I would never say that one is better than the other. It's all about where you are in your heart and your head. Like, make sense? And I would think I could speak for the board that they probably feel the same way.
Great.
Yes, ma'am.
What are some examples of projects that the Cuero Community Foundation has been able to fight off or help with?
That I'm gonna have to ask. Did you hear the question?
I wasn't sure.
What are some of the projects that you guys have worked on?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. When the pandemic hit, into 2020 and into 2021, we gave $100,000 match to anybody that would contribute towards the 3 food pantries in DeWitt County: Cuero, Yoakum, and Yorktown. And we actually wound up 3 food pantries got over $208,000, I think, out of the whole thing. So it's a way of helping different organizations at different times, and we felt like the pandemic and food was important. So that's what we did on that particular one. We're right now in the process of giving a grant to the Prior Ag Center, or actually I guess it's the Cuero Livestock Show, and we're gonna give $5,000 a year for 5 years to that organization, and hopefully that'll be coming out in some publicity here for too long. So that's something that I've been working with Greg Gossett and his bunch for a while. And there's a lot of ways that we can help, but we have to have money to do it. And I think you've seen from the presentations and that we've had here today that the donor advised fund is a great way to go, because you don't have to give it this year. Or you don't have to give it next year. You can just keep letting it grow until you decide what you want to give it to and when. And we're not in competition with Boys and Girls Club or the CISD Education Foundation, et cetera. We're here to try to help them grow. It's just a different, completely different organization.
Still a question, that the money that went to the food pantry, that, of course, that did not come out of any donor advised funds.
No, that's unrestricted funds. That's what he was talking about earlier, about unrestricted. We have donor advised funds that are restricted to your, whatever you decide that you want to give to, as long as it's a tax nonprofit.
So if I understand, there could be some overlap. This just offers you a larger supplement. You could still choose to direct funds to be donated to the Education Foundation.
And a good example of that is we were talking about IRAs. I'll put my IRA money into the Cuero Community Foundation and then turn around and give to the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum or the Stock Show or whoever it is. It'll come under the name of the Cuero Community Foundation per the instructions of Bill and Nancy Blackwell. So it's just another way of hopefully having a legacy.
Hey, Bill, one thing you might just kind of mention one thing you might just mention was mentioned earlier, but the field of interest fund would be maybe a way that someone asked a little while ago, what if I feel strongly about a couple of particular local charities? If you made the gift to the community fund, that gift would be, in the instructions to the community fund were to manage that and make it last as long as possible rather than giving to those charities, in one fell swoop. That's one function the
Yes.
foundation can do is to make that gift last for years. If that's what you want to do, and continue to support those organizations
Very
for
different.
years to come.
Yes.
Yeah, Bill, that was one of my questions, why do the community fund here do a directed fund to these foundations?
You want to answer?
Sure. So I think that's a really good point, and it's a great question. So with several of the community foundations that we work with, what we have found is the American Heart Association has money sitting in a local checking account, a couple $100,000 earning zero. And so a lot of times we will offer a platform for them to open an account with a community foundation, allow it to grow and be managed so that it'll at least keep pace with inflation. But then whether it's the Heart Association or an education fund or Save the Pets, whatever the purpose of that organization is, the community foundation is managing it. They're taking the administrative responsibility for it. But when you need it, it's there. And so it actually removes a duplication of effort within the community. Every single community charitable endeavor in the community is not having to set up their own thing. They can partner with the Cuero Community Foundation and build from there. So it is something in which everybody can benefit from.
Another example, CISD Education Foundation, the board had pretty well voted to accept 200,000 or above for a new donor. I'm talking about an individual, like you want to set up Dr. John Frail's family scholarship. Well, they would like to have 200,000. We can do it. We actually haven't set a minimum, but we've talked about it, something like 25,000. So if somebody wanted to set up one for the CISD Education Foundation, money going to scholarships, then we could go ahead and get started, and then they could continue to let that grow until one of these days maybe it would be over 200. So it's just another vehicle of trying to keep money in the community, help the community. So, anything else y'all want to say? Deborah, we're going to call on you to wrap it up.
I know everybody's ready to go. Well, when you got your invitation, a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they never sit in. And that's what I see out here. Philanthropic, beautiful, generous donors that Cuero is just really famous for. As my son said when I walked in a while ago, you failed to plan, Mom, you plan to fail. So that's what we're all about, planning for our future here, for all of our future generations here in Cuero. And I think so many of us out here are involved in so many different philanthropic organizations that we want to give to the Boys and Girls Club. We want to give to the Flower Ag Center. We want to give to the hospital, to the CISD Education Foundation, Chisholm Trail. And so this creates a vehicle to where we can get and make that happen. And I think it's a great way of instilling in our children all the Christian values and stuff that America was built on, and that we want to keep going, and we're not letting media do something else for us. So anyway, thank you all for coming. You people did a fabulous, fabulous job. You enlightened us with everything. We have a small gift of appreciation for you, and we just thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
David Kleineke, there's a little piece of paper right there by you on the table, little glass table there. Would you please hand those out to people when they leave? It'll give you a whole list of things that talk about the Cuero Community Foundation and what we do, etc. So thank y'all again. We appreciate it, and thank our speakers.
I gotta get them.